My world had shrunk to the size of a 19-inch monitor and the four walls of a rented cottage that smelled faintly of pine cleaner and someone else's memories. I'd come to this small, forgettable town to disappear. Not in a dramatic, running from the law kind of way. More in a quiet, licking my wounds kind of way. The breakup with Chloe hadn't just broken my heart, it had dismantled my sense of reality. 8 years erased. Replaced with a tearful confession over lukewarm coffee that she'd fallen in love with her coworker, Mark. Mark. The name felt like a dull thud in my chest every time I thought of it. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the specific nature of it. It fed a deep, dark seed of doubt I didn't even know I'd been carrying. A fear that I was somehow a placeholder, a practice round, before the real thing came along. So I ran. I packed my car, gave notice on our shared apartment, and drove until the city was just a smear of polluted light in my rearview mirror. This town, with its one traffic light and a general store that sold everything from tractor parts to organic kale, was perfect. Nobody knew me. Nobody had expectations. I was just the quiet woman in the back cottage, the one whose laptop glowed blue through the window late into the night. My work as a freelance graphic designer was my anchor. It was precise. It had rules. I could control the pixels, align the text, and create order from chaos. It was also, apparently, destroying my wrist. A dull ache had bloomed into a sharp, insistent pain that shot from my knuckles to my elbow. It was a physical manifestation of my life, a repetitive strain. The same movements, the same thoughts, the same loneliness, day in and day out, until something finally gave way. I tried a brace from the pharmacy. I tried ice packs and stretching exercises I found online. Nothing worked. The pain became a constant companion, a tiny, angry voice that made it hard to hold a coffee mug, let alone the delicate stylus I used for work. It was a problem I couldn't solve by myself. And I hated that. Relying on someone else felt like a risk I was no longer willing to take. But the deadlines were piling up, and the pain was winning. With a sigh that felt like it came from the soles of my feet, I looked up the number for the local clinic. Making the call felt like a surrender. The clinic was a small brick building, tidy and unassuming. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic and floor wax. It was quiet, the only sound the gentle hum of the fluorescent lights and the rustle of a magazine page being turned by an elderly man in the waiting area. I checked in with the receptionist, my voice feeling rusty from disuse. Alara Vance. I have a 10:30 appointment. She gave me a clipboard with forms. My personal history, reduced to a series of checkboxes and blank lines. As I filled it out, I felt a familiar wall slide into place inside me. The cool, detached persona I'd perfected. Yes, I live alone. No, I don't have an emergency contact in town. Each answer was a little brick in the fortress. Alara Vance. The voice was calm and smooth, like warm honey. I looked up. A woman stood in the doorway, holding a file. She was tall, with a presence that seemed to fill the small room without any effort at all. She wore simple blue scrubs that fit her in a way that was both professional and subtly arresting. Her hair was styled in intricate braids, adorned with a few delicate gold cuffs that caught the light. She was beautiful. It was a simple, objective fact, and my mind registered it with a distant, clinical sort of surprise. She was a black woman, and in this overwhelmingly white town, her presence was striking. She looked like she belonged here more than I ever would. Her eyes, a deep, intelligent brown, met mine. There was a flicker of something in them, curiosity maybe. Or maybe I was just projecting. That's me, I said, my voice a little tight. I'm Simone, she said, a small, professional smile on her lips. I'm one of the nurses here. Come on back. I followed her down a short hallway, my worn sneakers squeaking softly on the linoleum. I was acutely aware of her back, the straightness of her spine, the confident way she moved. She led me into a small examination room. You can have a seat on the table. The doctor will be in shortly, but I'll do the initial workup. What brings you in today? Her tone was all business, but her eyes were still kind. Too kind. It made me nervous. It's my wrist, I said, holding up my right hand as if for inspection. The cheap pharmacy brace looked flimsy and pathetic. Simone came closer. She didn't ask permission, just gently took my hand in hers. Her fingers were long and warm. The contact was electric. A jolt, sharp and unexpected, went straight up my arm, bypassing the pain and hitting something deep in my chest. Something that had been dormant for a very long time. I flinched, pulling back slightly before I could stop myself. Her eyes shot to mine, questioning. Sorry. Is that tender? No. It's fine. Just sensitive, the word hung in the air between us. She nodded slowly, her gaze analytical. She carefully removed the brace, her movements efficient and practiced. Her touch was firm but gentle as she exposed my wrist. Okay, she murmured, more to herself than to me. She began to palpate the area, her thumb pressing into the sore, tight muscles along my forearm. Tell me when it hurts. It all kind of hurts, I admitted, trying to keep my voice steady. I bet, she said. Her thumb circled a particularly tight knot, and I winced. There. Yes. There. She held the pressure for a moment, her gaze fixed on my wrist. I watched her face. The focused line of her brow, the slight parting of her lips. She was completely absorbed in her task. She was just doing her job. I repeated it to myself like a mantra. She's a nurse. This is clinical. This is what she does. But my body wasn't listening. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, panicked bird. The warmth of her hand was spreading through my entire system, a dangerous, creeping thaw. You're a graphic designer, it says here, she asked, glancing at the chart. Yes. Lots of mouse work, I'm guessing. Long hours. You could say that. She looked up at me then, and the professional mask slipped for just a second. A genuine, almost teasing smile touched her lips. You've really done a number on this, haven't you? There was no judgment in her voice, only a kind of wry understanding. It caught me off guard. I guess so, I mumbled, looking away. I stared at a poster on the wall illustrating the bones of the human hand. It felt safer than looking at her. She finished her examination, her touch becoming clinical again as she took my blood pressure and temperature. I missed the warmth of her hand already. The thought was so sharp and unwelcome that I felt my cheeks flush. What is wrong with me? All right, she said, making a few notes in the file. The doctor agrees with my assessment. This isn't something a simple brace is going to fix. The inflammation is pretty significant. We need to get the mobility back and break up some of the scar tissue. I braced myself for a referral to a specialist an hour away. Another complication. I run the physical therapy sessions here at the clinic, she continued, and my stomach did a nervous little flip. I'd like to see you twice a week for the next few weeks. We can do some targeted massage, stretching, and strengthening exercises. It should make a big difference. Twice a week. In a room with her. With her hands on me. The idea was both terrifying and something else. Something I refused to name. Okay, I heard myself say, the word feeling like it belonged to someone else. Good, she said, her smile returning. It was a full, genuine smile this time, and it lit up her whole face. It was devastating. Karen at the front desk will get you scheduled. I'll see you Thursday, Alara. She said my name like it was a smooth, round stone in her mouth. I just nodded, unable to form a coherent sentence. She left the room, and I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The air still seemed to hum with her presence. I sat there on the crackling paper of the exam table, my wrist throbbing with a dull ache. But it was the other ache, the one in my chest, that worried me more. It felt dangerously like hope. Thursday came too quickly. I spent the 2 days in between in a state of low-grade panic. I rearranged the furniture in my cottage. I deep-cleaned the kitchen. I took on a rush job for a client I didn't even like. Anything to keep my mind from drifting back to the clinic. Back to a pair of warm brown eyes and the feeling of a thumb pressing into my skin. It's just therapy. It's medical. She's a professional. The mantra did little to soothe the anxiety coiling in my gut. When I walked into the clinic on Thursday afternoon, my hands were clammy. Simone was waiting for me. This time, she wasn't in the main part of the clinic. She led me to a smaller room at the back of the building. The physical therapy room. It was a quiet, private space. A padded table, a rack of weights, and various bands and rollers lined one wall. The light was softer in here, coming from a large window that looked out onto a small, overgrown garden. It felt more intimate than the exam room. More secluded. "Have a seat," she said, gesturing to a stool next to a small table. She sat opposite me, her knees almost touching mine. The proximity was immediate and overwhelming. I could smell her scent again. That clean, soap and shea butter smell. It was subtle and comforting and made me want to lean closer. I gripped my hands together in my lap to stop myself. "So," she began, her voice low and focused. "Today, we're just going to work on some gentle massage to increase blood flow and start breaking up the tension in your forearm. It might be a little uncomfortable, but it shouldn't be painful. You tell me if it is." I nodded, my throat tight. She reached for my right arm, laying it on a small cushion on the table. Her touch was as I remembered, firm, warm, and professional. But this time, I was prepared for it. Or I thought I was. She started at my elbow, her fingers working into the tight, ropey muscles of my forearm. I watched her hands. They were strong, capable hands. The nails were short and neat. I imagined them typing notes, holding instruments, comforting a child. And now they were on me. I focused on my breathing, trying to stay detached. Inhale, exhale. It's just muscle and tissue. It's just a medical procedure. Her thumbs worked their way down my arm, pressing and circling. The discomfort was real, a deep, satisfying ache. But underneath it, something else was happening. Every point of contact was a tiny explosion on my skin. My awareness was completely centered on her touch. The slide of her fingers, the pressure of her palm, the heat radiating from her skin into mine. She was silent as she worked, her focus absolute. The only sound in the room was the whisper of her hands on my skin and the frantic beat of my own heart. I chanced to look at her face. Her eyes were closed, her brow furrowed in concentration. She was feeling the landscape of my arm, reading the tension in the muscles. She was so close. If I leaned forward just a few inches, my hair would brush her cheek. The thought sent a fresh wave of panic through me. I squeezed my eyes shut. "Don't go there, Alara. Do not go there." Chloe's face flashed in my mind. Her tear-streaked apology. The crushing weight of not being enough. "This is different. This is nothing." "You're holding a lot of tension here," Simone murmured, her thumb finding a particularly sensitive spot near my wrist. I gasped softly. Her eyes opened and met mine. The world stopped for a second. The professional distance vanished. In her gaze, I saw not a nurse looking at a patient, but a woman looking at a woman. The air grew thick and heavy. I couldn't look away. Her gaze was intense, searching. It felt like she could see right through the walls I'd so carefully built. It felt like she could see the lonely woman huddled inside. Then, as quickly as it came, the moment was gone. She blinked, and the nurse was back. She cleared her throat and looked down at my arm again. "Sorry," she said, her voice a little rough. "That's a major trigger point." "It's okay," I whispered. But it wasn't okay. Something had just shifted between us. A line had been blurred. Or had I imagined it? Was I so starved for connection that I was inventing intimacy where there was only professional care? The thought was mortifying. She moved on to my hand, her touch now painstakingly clinical. She manipulated each finger, stretching the tendons in my palm. Her thumb brushed across the center of my palm, a place no one had touched in years. It was so sensitive, so vulnerable. A shudder went through me. I couldn't help it. She stopped. "Alara." Her voice was soft, laced with concern. "I'm fine," I said, my voice strained. I pulled my hand back, cradling it to my chest. "I think that's enough for today." The rejection hung in the air between us. I hadn't meant it to sound so harsh. Her face was unreadable. She just nodded. "Okay," she said quietly. "You're probably right. We don't want to overdo it the first time." She stood up, moving to the sink in the corner of the room to wash her hands. I watched her, my chest tight with regret and confusion. I wanted to apologize. I wanted to explain. But how could I? How could I say, "Your touch makes me feel things I'm not ready to feel. You make me feel things I promised myself I would never feel again." Same time Tuesday, she asked, her back still to me. Yes, I said, my voice small. When she turned around, her professional smile was firmly back in place. But it didn't quite reach her eyes. I had hurt her. Or maybe I just made things awkward. Either way, I felt a familiar, sickening lurch of self-loathing. I fled the room, murmuring a quick goodbye. As I walked out into the bright afternoon sun, I felt more alone than ever. I had been offered a flicker of warmth, and I had recoiled as if from a flame. The next few sessions were a masterclass in avoidance. We developed a careful, unspoken choreography of distance. I would arrive exactly on time. She would be ready. We would exchange brief, polite greetings. How's the wrist been? A little better, I think. Then silence. She would work on my arm, her touch meticulously professional. I would stare at the wall, my body rigid, counting the seconds until it was over. The charged silences were worse than any conversation. The air crackled with everything we weren't saying. I could feel her watching me sometimes when she thought I wasn't looking. I would catch a glimpse of a troubled, questioning expression on her face before she would school her features back into a neutral mask. She started to fill the silence with professional chatter. Make sure you're doing the stretches I showed you. Consistency is key. Are you remembering to take breaks from the computer every hour? I would nod and give one-word answers. I was a terrible patient. I was a terrible person. One Tuesday, I arrived to find her talking to the elderly man I'd seen in the waiting room on my first day. She was laughing, a real, throaty laugh that filled the hallway. Her hand was resting on his arm, and her face was open and bright. The sight sent a pang of something sharp and ugly through me. Jealousy. It was so potent it made me dizzy. She saw me over his shoulder, and her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She quickly composed herself, said a warm goodbye to the man, and turned to me. Alara. Ready? The light was gone from her eyes. The professional nurse was back. It was my fault. I had put her on guard. I had made her withdraw. That day, in the therapy room, the silence was unbearable. I had to break it. So, you just click things all day? The question came out of nowhere. She was in the middle of stretching my fingers, and she paused. I blinked, confused. What? Your work, she said, a tiny, hesitant smile playing on her lips. It was a callback to a conversation we'd almost had weeks ago. A joke she had started. She was offering an olive branch. My heart leaped. Oh, I said, a laugh bubbling up, rusty and unused. Yeah, pretty much. I click things with style. Her smile widened. The relief in her eyes was palpable. With style, she repeated, nodding seriously. I see. Is it a lucrative business, this stylish clicking? It pays the rent on my hermit cottage, I quipped, and was immediately horrified by the word hermit. It was too close to the truth. But she just laughed. The hermit cottage. I like that. Does it have a moat? Not yet. It's on the to-do list. Right after learn to socialize with other humans. The words were out before I could stop them. My face burned with embarrassment. I had said too much. The wall was cracking. Simone's expression softened. The teasing light in her eyes was replaced by that same unnerving kindness from our first meeting. Socializing is overrated, she said gently. Especially in a town this small. Give me a good book over the gossip at the general store any day. You don't like it here? I asked, genuinely curious. She shrugged, her attention returning to my hand. But the atmosphere had changed. The tension was still there, but it was different now. It was less about avoidance and more about a shared, unspoken understanding. It's complicated, she said after a moment. I grew up in Chicago. This was an adjustment. It's quiet. It's safe. But it can also be isolating. Isolating. She had used the word. She understood. Why did you move here? I asked, my voice soft. She met my gaze, and this time I didn't look away. My mother got sick. She lived here with my aunt. I came to help take care of her. Her voice was matter-of-fact, but I could hear the deep well of sadness beneath the surface. She passed away 3 years ago. I'm so sorry, I said, and I meant it. Thank you, she said, her eyes holding mine. I just stayed. My aunt is still here. I have a job I'm good at. It's a life. She didn't say it was a happy life. And in that moment, I saw it. The flicker of loneliness I had sensed on that first day. It wasn't a projection. It was real. She was hiding too, in her own way. Hiding behind her professionalism, her competence, her role in the community. We were two lonely women, hiding in plain sight in a small town. The realization was so profound, so overwhelming, that I felt a sudden, desperate urge to reach out and take her hand. Not the patient taking the nurse's hand, but just me, Alara, taking Simone's hand. I didn't, of course. But the desire was so strong it felt like a physical act. She must have seen something in my face, because she gently disengaged her hand from mine and stood up. I think we're done for today, she said, her voice a little thick. The session was over, but something was just beginning. The wall between us hadn't just cracked. It had started to crumble. The next week, it was raining. Not a gentle spring shower, but a full-blown autumn tempest. The wind howled around the corners of the clinic, and rain lashed against the windows. My appointment was the last one of the day. By the time I arrived, the waiting room was empty, and the lights in the main part of the building had been dimmed. It felt like we were the only two people left in the world. Nasty weather, Simone said as she led me back to the therapy room. She was wearing a soft-looking gray sweater over her scrubs, and she looked tired. It's kind of cozy, I said, surprising myself. She smiled, a small, weary smile. I guess it is. The atmosphere in the room was different today. The storm outside seemed to insulate us, wrapping the small space in a bubble of quiet intimacy. She sat down opposite me, closer than usual. Wrist, she said, her voice a low murmur. It wasn't a command, just a simple statement. I placed my arm on the cushion. She took my hand, her fingers cool at first, then quickly warming against my skin. She didn't start the massage right away. She just held my hand, her thumb stroking gently over my knuckles. It wasn't clinical. It wasn't therapy. It was a touch that spoke a language I was only just beginning to remember. My breath hitched. Alara, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I looked up. Her eyes were dark and deep, and they were full of a raw, undisguised emotion that made my heart ache. You're holding your breath, she said softly. I let it out in a shaky sigh. I know. She didn't pull away. Her gaze held mine, steady and searching. The storm outside raged, but in here, there was a profound stillness. What are you so afraid of? She asked. The question was so direct, so gentle, it disarmed me completely. The walls, already crumbling, simply dissolved. Tears pricked my eyes. I was horrified. I hadn't cried in front of another person in almost a year. I don't know, I lied, my voice trembling. I think you do, she said, her voice impossibly soft. Her thumb moved from my knuckles to the center of my palm, tracing a slow, deliberate circle. The same spot that had made me flinch weeks ago. This time, I didn't pull away. I leaned into the touch. A single tear escaped and traced a hot path down my cheek. She didn't comment on it. She just kept her eyes on mine, her expression a mixture of profound tenderness and a deep, aching sadness that mirrored my own. It gets lonely, she said, her voice thick with unspoken meaning. It was a continuation of our last conversation, but it was about so much more than living in a small town. It was about us. Just then, the lights flickered violently and then died, plunging the room into near darkness. The only light came from the emergency exit sign at the end of the hall, casting a faint, ghostly green glow into the room. The hum of the building's systems went silent. All we could hear was the rain and the wind, and the sound of our own breathing. In the sudden dark, her hand tightened on mine. It was an instinct. A reflex. A reaching for connection in the sudden void. My heart was pounding so hard, I was sure she could feel the vibration through my hand. Neither of us spoke. The moment stretched, suspended in the darkness. I could feel her leaning closer. I could feel the warmth of her breath on my face. She smelled of rain and that same clean, comforting scent. She was going to kiss me. The thought was both a prayer and a panic. My entire body was screaming yes, while my mind, my treacherous, wounded mind, was screaming no, 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 you can't do this. You'll just get hurt again. I was frozen, caught between desire and fear. She was so close. Her lips were inches from mine. I closed my eyes. And then, the lights flickered back on. Harsh, fluorescent, brutally bright. We both flinched back as if burned. She snatched her hand away from mine. I felt the loss of her touch like a physical blow. She stood up abruptly, turning away from me. She ran a hand over her face, her back rigid. I should check the breaker, she stammered, her voice strained and unfamiliar. Simone, I started, but I didn't know what to say. She didn't turn around. The session's over, Alara. You should go home before the storm gets worse. Her tone was dismissive, clinical. The wall was back up, higher and stronger than ever. And this time, I knew it wasn't to protect her from me. It was to protect herself. I stood up, my legs feeling like they were made of lead. The almost kiss, the raw vulnerability of the moment, hung in the air between us like a ghost. I walked out of the room without another word. As I hurried through the empty clinic, I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. I hadn't just cracked the wall. I had broken something. Something fragile and precious that was just beginning to grow between us. And I didn't know if it could ever be fixed. The drive home was a blur of rain and swirling headlights. I sat in my cold cottage, the silence pressing in on me. The storm outside was a pale imitation of the one raging inside me. I had been so close to letting someone in, so close to feeling something real again. And I had hesitated. In that crucial, split second before the lights came back on, I had hesitated. She must have felt it. The infinitesimal tensing of my muscles, the slight pulling back. My fear had been a tangible thing in the dark, and it had pushed her away. I replayed the moment over and over. The darkness, the warmth of her breath, the feeling that the entire universe had shrunk to the space between our lips, and the blinding, unforgiving light that had shattered it all. I was a fool. My next appointment was in 2 days. The thought of it filled me with a mixture of terror and a desperate, aching hope. Maybe I could fix it. Maybe I could find the words. Maybe it wasn't too late. I spent the next 48 hours in a state of suspended animation. I couldn't work. I couldn't read. I couldn't even watch TV. My mind was a constant loop of her face, her voice, her touch. What are you so afraid of? The question echoed in the quiet rooms of my cottage. I was afraid of this. This feeling. This gut-wrenching, heart-stopping, all-consuming feeling. I was afraid of needing someone. I was afraid of being left. I was afraid of discovering, once again, that I was not enough. When the day of my appointment arrived, I felt physically ill. My hands were shaking as I got into my car. What am I doing? Maybe I should just cancel. Just call and say my wrist is all better. Lie. It would be easier. Safer. I could go back to my quiet, lonely, predictable life. But the thought of never seeing her again was a sharp, physical pain. I couldn't. I had to go. I had to know. I walked into the clinic like a woman walking to her own execution. The receptionist gave me a polite smile. The elderly man was there again, reading his magazine. Everything was painfully, terrifyingly normal. Simone appeared in the doorway. My heart stopped. She looked exhausted. There were dark circles under her eyes. She didn't smile. Alara, she said, her voice flat. Come back. I followed her down the hall in a dead silence. The air between us was thick with unspoken words, with the ghost of that moment in the dark. We entered the therapy room. It looked just the same. The window, the table, the stool. But everything felt different. The intimacy was gone, replaced by a cold, sterile tension. I sat down on the stool. She remained standing. She didn't ask me to sit opposite her. She didn't move to the table. She just stood there, by the door, her arms crossed over her chest. How's the wrist? She asked. The question was a formality. A hollow echo of our old routine. It's fine, I said, my voice barely a whisper. She nodded, her gaze fixed on something over my shoulder. This was it. She was going to end it. She was going to tell me the therapy was complete, that I didn't need to come back. My chest tightened with a grief so profound it stole my breath. She was silent for a long, agonizing moment. I watched her, memorizing the line of her jaw, the way a single braid had come loose and curled against her neck. Then she sighed, a deep, weary sound. She walked over to the door. My stomach plummeted. She was leaving. She couldn't even stand to be in the same room with me. But she didn't open the door. Instead, she reached out and turned the lock. The soft, metallic click was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It echoed in the sudden, absolute silence of the room. She turned around to face me, leaning back against the locked door. Her expression was one of grim resolution. The professional mask was gone. The exhaustion was gone. All that was left was a raw, searing intensity. "Okay," she said, her voice low and steady, cutting through the tension like a knife. "We can't keep doing this." My heart hammered against my ribs. "The therapy is working," she continued, her eyes never leaving mine. "Your wrist is getting better. But I don't think that's the only thing that needs attention." She paused, and her gaze was so intense it felt like a physical touch. "I think we need a closer exam." The words hung in the air, charged with 1,000 unspoken meanings. This was it. The precipice. "Simone," I started, my voice breaking. "No," she said, holding up a hand. "Let me talk. Please. I need to say this." I fell silent, my hands clenched into fists in my lap. "I am a professional," she said, her voice tight with control. "I have never, ever crossed a line with a patient. I take my job, my responsibilities, very seriously." She pushed off the door and took a step towards me. "But from the moment you walked in here, Alara, something happened." I tried to ignore it. I tried to tell myself it was just me. That I was just lonely. Another step. She was closer now. "But it's not just me, is it? I feel something when I'm with you. Something real. And I'm pretty damn sure you feel it too." Her voice was raw, vulnerable. The confident, capable nurse was gone, replaced by this woman with her heart laid bare. "But you are so terrified," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "You're so terrified you look like you're about to bolt at any second. The other night, in the dark, I felt you pull away. Just for a second. But I felt it." Shame washed over me, hot and sickening. She was right. I'm not a mind reader, Alara. And I can't do this anymore. This dance we're doing. It's tearing me apart. She stopped just a few feet away from me. Her chest was rising and falling rapidly. She was just as scared as I was. "So this is it," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "You have to tell me. Am I crazy? Did I imagine everything? Just tell me, and I'll unlock that door, and we will go back to being nurse and patient, and I will never, ever mention this again. I swear." Her eyes pleaded with me. This was my choice. I could retreat. I could lie. I could save myself the risk, the potential for pain. I could walk out that door and back into my safe, gray, lonely world. Or I could be brave. Just once. Chloe's face flashed in my mind. The pain of her rejection. The feeling of being discarded. But then Simone's face replaced it. Her kindness. Her laugh. The look in her eyes in the dark. The courage she was showing right now, standing in front of me, her heart in her hands. She deserved more than my fear. I deserved more than my fear. My whole body was trembling. I looked down at my hands, at the wrist she had so carefully healed. And I made a choice. I looked up at her, and for the first time, I let her see everything. The fear, the desire, the hope, the years of pain. All of it. 2 words escaped my lips, small and broken, but they were the truest words I had ever spoken. "I'm scared." The admission hung in the air between us. It was a confession. It was an answer. It was everything. A wave of emotion crossed Simone's face. Relief, so profound it seemed to make her sag against an invisible weight. Tenderness. Understanding. She closed the distance between us in a single, slow step. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. She just stood before me, a silent question in her eyes. Slowly, deliberately, I unlaced my fingers from their death grip and held out my hand. My left hand. My good hand. Not the patient's hand. My hand. A tear slid down her cheek, mirroring the one I had shed in the dark. She took my hand. Her fingers laced with mine, a perfect fit. The contact was a current of pure, unadulterated relief. It flowed through me, washing away the fear, the doubt, the loneliness. She lifted my hand to her lips, her eyes never leaving mine. And she pressed a soft, warm kiss to my palm, right in the center. The gesture was so tender, so intimate, it broke me. A sob escaped my throat, a sound of pure, cathartic release. "It's okay," she whispered, her lips still against my skin. "I'm scared too." She lowered my hand, but she didn't let go. She leaned in, and this time there was no hesitation. Not from her and not from me. Her other hand came up to cup my face, her thumb stroking my cheek, wiping away a tear I didn't even know had fallen. And then she kissed me. It wasn't a desperate, frantic kiss. It wasn't the explosive kiss I had imagined in the dark. It was soft. It was tentative. It was a question and an answer all at once. It tasted of salt and relief and the promise of a new beginning. I kissed her back, pouring every ounce of my fear, my hope, and my aching, desperate longing into it. It was a kiss that said, "I see you. I'm here. Please don't leave." When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. She rested her forehead against mine, our hands still clasped tightly between us. I could feel the soft texture of her braids against my skin. I could feel the gentle puff of her breath. We just stood there, in the quiet, locked room. The storm inside me had finally passed. In its place was a profound, quiet calm. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full. Full of possibility. Full of us. "So," she murmured, her voice a low, happy rumble against my forehead. "About that closer exam." I laughed, a real, genuine laugh that came from deep in my belly. "I think," I said, my voice steady and clear for the first time in a very long time, "that I'm ready for it." She squeezed my hand, and in the quiet safety of that small room, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt like I was home. We stayed like that for a long time, just breathing each other in. Foreheads together, hands entwined. The world outside the locked door ceased to exist. There were no patients, no charts, no past heartbreaks. There was only the solid warmth of her hand in mine and the steady rhythm of her breathing. Finally, she pulled back, just enough to look at me. Her eyes were soft, the deep brown shining with a light that made my chest ache in the best possible way. "We should probably," she started, gesturing vaguely towards the door. "People will wonder." "Let them," I said, and the boldness of it surprised even me. A small, confident smile played on my lips. Simone's answering smile was dazzling. "I like this version of you, Alara Vance." "Me too," I admitted. "I think she got lost for a while." "Well, I'm glad she found her way back." She didn't kiss me again. Instead, she did something even more intimate. She brought my hand, our joined hands, to her chest and rested them over her heart. I could feel the steady, strong beat against my knuckles. Thump-thump. Thump-thump. It was the most reassuring sound in the world. "My aunt is having me over for dinner on Friday," she said, her tone casual, but I could see the nervousness in her eyes. "She makes a pot roast that could solve world peace. You should come." It wasn't a question. It was an invitation into her life. The part of it that existed outside this room, outside the clinic. The old me would have panicked. Made an excuse. Pledged allegiance to my hermit cottage. The new me, the one holding Simone's hand, just smiled. I'd love that. The relief that washed over her face was beautiful. She finally, reluctantly, let go of my hand and walked to the door. She paused with her hand on the lock. "Just so you know," she said, turning to look at me over her shoulder, "my aunt will ask you at least 20 questions. She thinks everyone I meet is a potential daughter-in-law." "I can handle it," I said. And for the first time, I believed it. She unlocked the door. The sound was no longer ominous. It was a beginning. We walked out of the therapy room and back into the normal world. But everything had changed. The hallway seemed brighter. The air felt lighter. As we passed the front desk, Karen, the receptionist, looked up. She glanced at Simone, then at me, then at the small, secret smile that I couldn't seem to wipe off my face. A knowing look passed over Karen's features. She just nodded once and went back to her work. In a small town, some things don't need to be announced. They just are. A few months later, I was sitting on the porch swing of my cottage. My cottage. It no longer felt rented or temporary. It felt like mine. The evening was warm, and the air smelled of honeysuckle from the vine that snaked its way up the railing. Simone was sitting beside me, her shoulder pressed against mine. Her arm was draped around me, her fingers toying with a strand of my hair. I held up my right hand, flexing my wrist. There was no pain, no tightness, just strength and flexibility. All better, I said, turning my hand over to examine it in the fading light. I'm a very good nurse, Simone said, her voice a low hum beside my ear. She pressed a soft kiss to my temple. You are, I agreed. Although your methods are a little unconventional. She laughed, a warm, rich sound that had become my favorite music. Hey, I got the job done. The patient is fully recovered. The patient is very grateful, I said, turning to face her. The setting sun caught the gold cuffs in her braids, making them glow. Her eyes were full of a deep, settled love that still, after all these weeks, made me feel like I couldn't quite catch my breath. I thought back to that first day in the clinic. The fear, the loneliness, the way I had flinched from her touch. It felt like a lifetime ago, like a story about someone else. It was amazing, really. How the most terrifying moments of your life could lead you to the most beautiful places. How a mundane, painful injury could be the catalyst for healing a wound so much deeper. I had come to this town to be alone. I had built a fortress around my heart, convinced that solitude was safety. But Simone hadn't stormed the walls. She hadn't broken down the door. She had just stood outside, patiently, kindly, and waited for me to let her in. She leaned in and kissed me, a slow, easy kiss that tasted of familiarity and a future I was no longer afraid of. When she pulled away, she rested her chin on my shoulder, and we watched the fireflies begin to dot the twilight. You know, she said softly, for someone who owns a hermit cottage, you're not a very good hermit. I laughed, leaning my head against hers. I had a really good teacher. We sat in comfortable silence as the darkness gathered around us, two people who had found each other in the quiet spaces. Home wasn't a cottage with a porch swing. It wasn't a town with one traffic light. Home was the steady weight of her arm around my shoulders. Home was the feeling of her hand, safe and warm, in mine. Have you ever found something truly beautiful in a place you least expected it?